This is our second in our sermon in our series on fire. And today we're going to look at Moses. If there's anybody in the Old Testament that you might know, it's probably Moses. You know, the Ten Commandments, parting the Red Sea, Prince of Egypt, Charlton Heston, Moses. His story actually starts 400 years earlier, when God tells Abraham that he will have a family that will become a great people. But these people will become slaves in a foreign land. 400 years later, Moses' parents are part of this family who would become slaves in Egypt. Moses, however, was adopted by the daughter of the king of Egypt. And so he grows up knowing a little bit different side of life. But when he becomes an adult, he runs away from Egypt and he marries the daughter of a tribal priest and settles down for the quiet life of a sheep farmer out in the desert. Depending on how you look at it, Moses' life was peaceful and serene or dull and dreary. Every day, pretty much the same routine. Every day, get up, kiss the wife, go to work, leading the sheep around the desert looking for food, come home, eat dinner, go to bed. Call it ideal or call it boring, whichever. However you look at it, Moses' life is certainly not exciting. It was comfortable, no surprises, until one day he meets a burning bush. We hear that story in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. This event would be the turning point in Moses' life, though he doesn't realize it right now. This event would be the turning point for a whole nation, for the whole world. You and I wouldn't be worshiping here this morning were it not for this burning bush. More importantly, you and I wouldn't be worshiping here this morning were it not for the fact that Moses stopped and went over to look at it. How many times do we see some curious things that God is doing, but we just keep moving? We have busy schedules to keep, places to be, or perhaps we're too preoccupied even to notice the burning bushes in front of us. But Moses has a curious mind. And so he watches the bush. And though it's on fire, it doesn't burn up. And this isn't normal. Perhaps this is truly renewable energy. He has to go see. So he walks over. And instead of making the latest discovery in wood-burning technology, he discovers a call from God. Verse 4. When the Lord saw that he had gone to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Hi, Moses. Good to see you. This is God. Remember that promise made to your ancestor Abraham 400 years ago? Well, I am that God. And you have a part in this promise. So go back to Pharaoh and bring my people out of Egypt. I can just see Moses' jaw drop. Oh, and did I mention that the reason that Moses ran away from Egypt is that the Pharaoh was trying to kill him? And now God wants him to go back and face his greatest fear and lead the people of God to freedom. And he did. The rest, as they say, is history. All because he stopped to look at a burning bush. Now that's a neat little history lesson. But you didn't come here today for a history lesson. If you wanted a history lesson, you could have stayed at home and watched the History Channel. And I'm not preaching on the story of the burning bush because I want you to be experts on the life of Moses. No, I'm preaching here this morning, and we're worshiping here this morning because God is still burning bushes. God is still setting bushes on fire, calling us out of our routines, whether we welcome it or not, and calling us into a life of purpose, a life of meaning, a life that can change the world. I know. I got my burning bush when I was 16 years old. Actually, it was a lot of burning bushes, and trees and shrubs and grass too. I was on a mission trip to New Mexico to help fix up a Methodist school there. And like Solid Rock did on their mission trip this past week, we had both time for work and time for some sightseeing. In our case, after a week of work on the school, we went backpacking in the dry mountains of Bandelier National Monument. One morning, we woke to find ourselves in thick fog, although it wasn't fog, it was smoke. The forest was on fire. Now, many of you have heard me tell this story before, so I won't go into all the details. But the fire was between us and our vans. And so there was only one thing that we could do: try to make an escape and outrun the fire down to the only source of water in the area, the Rio Grande River, which was miles away. We broke camp and we fled down out of the mountains across the desert scrub and towards the river. Even without the fire, the temperature in the air was well over 100 degrees, and there was no water. We hiked all day long in the desert heat, trying to beat the fire to the river and praying that we would make it before we collapsed from heat stroke. By evening, after 12 hours of outrunning the fire, we made it to the Rio Grande, but there we faced another dilemma. We were too weak to swim across. We couldn't go south because there was a great cliff there that blocked our path, and on the other side was the fire coming toward us. They say there are no atheists in foxholes, and I can assure you there are no atheists in forest fires. We needed a miracle. As night fell, we got it in the form of the U.S. Coast Guard. They sent a boat up the river to rescue us, and they plucked us from the shore just before the fire raced down to the river's edge. And from the safety of the rescue base, we watched the flames leap up into the black sky. At 16, I had stared into the deadly flames, and I was thankful to be alive. But more importantly, in that experience, I heard God's call on my life. Prior to that, I believed in God. Most people did, just like Moses did. But I was more concerned with probably girls and grades and good times. But in that experience, I heard God make a claim upon my life. I heard God say to me, "From now on, your life is mine. You will live for me." And I said, "Okay, God, you lead, and I will follow." Well, eventually God led me to be a pastor, to be able to worship with you here today. Because God is still calling. God is still setting bushes on fire. But it's not just pastors, and it's not just literally burning bushes.